I wanted to suggest three things I think employers should think hard about doing differently when it comes to harassment prevention, because I don't think most people are doing much differently. I was speaking to an HR group last week, probably 40 to 45 people in the room, good, quality, educated HR people, and I asked the question, other than making sure you're doing your training, maybe looking at your policy a little bit, making sure it's in place and signed off on, is anybody really doing something different when it comes to harassment, prevention, training, things like that? I got no hands on that, and this was a group that was not reluctant to participate in things. And I do think that reflects that not much has really changed here, say, a year and a half after the start of Me Too. I've mentioned before, I do think the expectations on employers are going to increase. In some ways, we're getting, as we've talked about before, different rules in different states a little bit, but I think the real potential quote-unquote growth area is expecting employers to do a better job finding unreported harassment. We've talked about a court decision out of Pennsylvania that suggests that, and I think there will be others of those kinds of decisions, and the law has enough gray area. We've talked about the meaning of severe and pervasive that allows for that to happen. We'll watch that, but that's my expectation. So whether it's to avoid that liability or just to make your workplace a better workplace, or both, here are three things I think every company should think about doing differently on the harassment front. Number one, look at your training. I've talked before, I think the model of the annual training, while still sort of generally accepted as best practice and therefore should not be abandoned, I'm not sure it's effective. I just don't think a requirement that you watch a video or come down to HR to be talked to for an hour and a half necessarily opens people's minds to thinking hard about their behavior. Now, I do think there are really good trainers who can be very effective in person. We had one recently here at our firm. But it needs to be interactive, they need to be good, and a lot of what I see, particularly some of these commercial videos, just don't think are going to compel people to really examine their behavior. So that's number one, look hard at your training. Number two, not totally unrelated, because I do think a model that has more frequent, shorter conversations is more likely to change habits and awareness. And so just find opportunities to talk more regularly about harassment kinds of issues. Do it in a staff meeting. Do it in sort of, you have your sales group together, have a little piece on that. Just have that be a regular topic of conversation to have people thinking about it and interacting about it. I think one really good example is giving people strategies of what to do when they are a bystander to behavior that they think is inappropriate. People don't necessarily know how to handle that, and that's something you can talk about, exchange different views, and leave people maybe with an idea of how to address that, because I think that's an important part of prevention. Number three, absolutely do look at your policy, but look at it specifically with an eye towards, are there things in here that might deter reporting? Because as I say, I do think underreporting is the fundamental challenge here. I think it's unquestioned that many people experience what they think is inappropriate and or harassment and don't report it. And I think some policies can contribute to that. People don't want to make a bigger deal of it than they think it is, and some policies suggest it's an on-off switch between doing nothing and a big deal. So I think it's important that your policy suggests that the response is in proportion to the nature of behavior. I think it's important that a policy not go too far, if at all, on the subject of what you do with false complaints. If somebody fabricates a complaint, which is very unusual, we can demonstrate that in a way that we could act on it. I think you can act on it without having said it in your policy, and I think to have a big paragraph in your policy saying all the bad things you're going to do to people who make false complaints can have a deterrent effect. I also think the policy should be sure to address not only harassment, but just inappropriate behavior. So I think most people watching this know not all inappropriate behavior is legally harassment under the current law. You don't want people thinking about, maybe this doesn't rise to the level of harassment or not, So I'm not going to report it because I'm not sure. We want to know about inappropriate behavior, even when it's little inappropriate behavior. If it's little behavior, we can address it on a smaller scale, and it's important that your policy communicate that. So I think those are three important things that everybody ought to think seriously about and do. I just don't think the law is going to be static such that it's a good answer that, no, we don't really do anything differently now.